Well, good morning. What an incredibly beautiful Mother's Day weekend. And I'm so pleased that we're here together for part 5 of this series called A Reason to Believe. 6-part series. We wrap up next weekend. And so part 5 today. Those of you worshiping with us at our other campuses, I'm just so pleased we get to spend this time together. I think this is going to be one of our most important conversations that we have in this series. Reason to Believe, the idea behind it is that I believe that faith can be fluid. That is, that there will be people who are exploring faith and moving toward faith. Other people who will say, man, I once was a believer and, we went through this tragedy, this mess, this challenge, this series of disappointments, and we just don't know anymore. I don't know anymore what I believe. So people can grow in their faith, and often it can recede. And there are a host of others who would just confess that our faith is old and cold and dry and dusty, and something just needs to be revived to have a faith worth having. So it's my joy to engage in these conversations with you. And I think for a number of reasons that today is going to be, I think, one of our most important conversations on this topic. So every once in a while, you'll be shopping and you'll see like the People magazine there right by the checkout line, and there's a cover and it says, the most beautiful people in the world, and if you picked up a copy, to thumb through and say, who are the most beautiful people, judged to be the most beautiful people in the world, most of the time, they're wrong. This is one of the most beautiful people in the world, right there. Happens to be my granddaughter that lives in Chicago. Her name is Hazel, and I can't say she's the most beautiful person in the world because I do have 3 grandchildren, so it's prudent to declare a 3-way tie, I guess. But a few things I'd like you to know about Hazel. One is Hazel was born with Down syndrome and has had a litany of medical issues. 4 extended hospital stays, including open heart surgery last August. And she's 13 months old, celebrated her 1-year birthday last month. But in those 13 months, I think she spent almost 3 months of her life in ICU. So this picture was taken at one of the better seasons, one of the better weeks, but my kids have been through a challenge, and she's, medically speaking, she's just not out of the woods yet. Hazel is a joy and a treasure and a gift to our family. But walk up to a couple expecting a baby and say, okay, be honest with me. Do you want a boy or a girl? Be honest, you want a boy or a girl? And if they go, it doesn't matter whether it's a boy or girl, as long as they're developmentally delayed and have a massive heart defect, and as long as we get to spend months of our lives in the hospital, that's all we want. You'd kind of consider that rare. That would be the response. So I'm just kind of wondering, do you ever ask why? You ever look at your own situation or a situation of friends going through a season that, man, is just challenging? Just go, why them? Why this? Why that? Why now? Why us? You ever look at a situation and go, come on, God, why them? Why that? It's very possible that you've never asked that question, but this, my friends, is a question that Jesus' disciples asked him. They're in the city of Jerusalem, and they're walking along, and they see a man that was blind. Not only blind, but they happen to know that he was born with this condition. And Jesus' disciples, they take this opportunity to ask him, well, what's up with that? I mean, why them? Why that? Why this? Why him? And that's a question they asked Jesus, and a question that Jesus responded to. Now, the setting for our story is here. Well, it's this artist's rendition concept of what the city of Jerusalem may have looked like. This part's accurate. It's a temple of Jerusalem on a hilltop, and it's so the The fact that the temple was in Jerusalem made it kind of like the spiritual epicenter of the country. But there was more to Jerusalem than just the temple. There were streets, and there was houses, markets, and there were people, and there were shoppers, and there were beggars. And it's here that Jesus is walking with his disciples in Jerusalem when they see this man that was born blind, and they go, why? Why them? Why this? They didn't ask quite that way. Their question had a little bit more theological quarry behind it. John chapter 9, verse 1, it says, as Jesus went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? I mean, in our culture, we ask the question, why do bad things happen to good people? In first century Israel, that wasn't a question they asked. Why do bad things happen to good people? They went, listen, if something really nasty happens to you, you probably had it coming. You probably did something, there was some sin, some crime against God, and then God sent this challenge into your life as punishment. And so they just asked a question, but there's the deal. If you had it coming and you were born with a condition, I mean, you haven't done anything yet. And so that was their question, who sinned, this man or his parents? Like, what went wrong here? What sin is God punishing? And Jesus goes, neither. It's this condition that this guy was born with. It's not because of something he did or something because of what his parents did. Now, spoiler alert, Jesus is going to heal this guy of his blindness. In the story today. Now, some of you are already going, okay, I get it. Series is called Reason to Believe. There's a blind guy, and Jesus heals the blind guy, and a whole bunch of people believe in Jesus. No. Jesus sees this blind guy who's going to heal the blind guy, and the blind guy, what's going to happen is there's going to be this whole controversy that surrounds the healing. That is, that the actual healing occupies 2 verses, and the story is 41 verses long. And the majority of the verses focus not around people coming to faith, not about people believe in Jesus, but about angry, diehard, vehement unbelief. And it's only one of the varieties of unbelief. But one of the varieties of unbelief is to say, I don't care what evidence you throw at me. I don't care what I see. I don't care what persuasive arguments. I absolutely refuse to believe. Not every form of unbelief is like that, right? I mean, the people go, dude, I'm not a believer yet, but I'm exploring. I'm trying to figure out, is the Bible credible? Is it possible that Jesus, like nailed to a Roman cross, could actually come back to life, a resurrection? And I'm not a believer yet, but it's an exploratory unbelief. That's a different variety than we're going to look at today. There's another type of unbelief where a person goes, I was a believer and I don't know anymore. I don't know what I believe anymore. I don't know that I buy it anymore. I did, but then I had this difficulty, this challenge, this series of disappointments, and I don't know anymore. And it's like this borderline unbelief, but you're kind of still in. That's different than what we're gonna see. We see an angry, vehement, I don't care what the evidence is, we refuse to believe. And so it's worth exploring, and I think it's what makes today one of our more important conversations, just to know that exists, particularly if that's where you find yourself this weekend. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Back to the question. Jesus is walking with his disciples. They see a man born blind. And what question do they ask? They ask, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be born blind? Now, we're not told a bunch about this guy. We're not told his name. We're not told his age. He could be 23. He could be 44. We don't know how old this guy is. We do know that there would have been a day when his mom discovered that she was expecting. And as her belly begins to grow, they wonder, is it going to be a boy or a girl? She goes into labor. No ultrasounds in those days, no way to tell in advance, boy or girl. The baby's born, and the midwife or whoever assists with the labor goes, it's a boy, you have a boy. Looks at the dad, you have a son. He goes, wonderful, now someone I can teach my trades to, and if I die before my wife, someone that can take care of my wife as she ages. And either then, on the day of his birth or later, they discover that he can't see, doesn't see, won't ever see. He begins to say, I won't be teaching him my trade. I mean, we got lots of options in our culture for the visually impaired. First century Middle Eastern culture, you're down to one career option. You beg. You sit there with your hand out and you beg. And the guy wonders, I hope I live long enough because it looks like we could be supporting him rather than him supporting us in our senior years. I wonder if his family ever asked, why this, why us, why now, why that, why him, why? People do heal of various things. I mean, a neighbor kid breaks his arm, and the arm heals, and this boy raised sightless, raised in darkness, said, well, his arm healed, will my vision ever heal? And his mom and dad go, hon, there is nothing recorded in all of the scriptures, in all of our history, that someone ever born with blindness is healed. Don't be under the illusion that this is going to go away. It's never happened. Jesus walks with his disciples. They see the man and they say, what's up with that? What's up with that? Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he should be born blind? And Jesus says, neither. But what Jesus does say is critical to us, I think. Very helpful. He says, neither this man nor his parents sinned, Jesus said, but this happened so that so that the works of God might be displayed in him. Now that first clause there, neither this man nor his parents sinned. Jesus isn't saying this guy has never sinned and his parents have never sinned. He's not saying nobody ever messed up with anything. Jesus is saying that this particular condition isn't because they messed up, because they did something wrong. What Jesus is declaring here is that a traumatic situation in life and personal wrong are not always linked. Sometimes they are. I mean, several points in scripture that it says that God can discipline us in any way he chooses. 4 chapters before this story, John chapter 5, Jesus heals a guy that can't walk. Jesus looks at the guy and says, listen, stop sinning or something worse will happen to you. Stop sinning or something worse can happen to you. So there are times when God can discipline us, but Jesus said, this is not one of those cases. Who sinned? This man or his parents? Jesus said, neither one, but that what did he say? The what of God? The works of God might be on display in him, that the works of God might be displayed in his life. Let's just camp out there for a moment and let's just focus on that term, the works of God. But I'd like to spin it a little bit and just say, listen, what if God is at work? What if God is work? What if God is at work not only in spite of the tragedy or challenge we are experiencing? What if God is at work in and around and through the challenge or tragedy we're experiencing? What if God is at work? What if God desires to put his works on display in our life during a season that we find incredibly confusing, or even when we're suffocating in grief? What if the works of God can be on display? I think that's a great question to ask. I think it's a great question to ask when your company is going through a second merger in 5 years. Often the purpose of a merger is consolidation, economy of scale. You're able to pare down some positions. So there's a merger and you go, I knew what I did, I don't know what I do now, but you find your place, it's a new place, new job description, but then there's a second merger and everything is in upheaval again. Listen, what if the work of God what if God desires to be at work, not simply in spite of the chaos, but through and in and around the chaos? What if the works of God are on display in the second miscarriage, in the funeral home with a devastating loss? What if God desires to be powerfully at work and to put his work on display as the couple drives up the parking ramp to walk into the hospital and then out of the hospital to the parking ramp and down the parking ramp again and again and again and again and again. Often in these seasons, we feel the absence of God. We feel the silence of God. We feel the distance of God. And Jesus' words here, no, this happened so that the works of God could be revealed on display in him. I say, what if God desires to be powerfully at work in the middle of the mess? In and through and around the situation. I have no idea of the challenges that must be going on in our rooms today. I just know that life being life, and family and health and finance, just so many of us traveling through just a very challenging season. And what would it look like even today just to open your heart and to open your hands and just say, God, please be at work in and through and around this. I don't want this situation. I didn't ask for this situation. I don't understand this situation, but please be at work in this situation. Please put your works on display in and through and around this. And now Jesus is gonna heal the guy, so get ready. Probably gonna have some abracadabra type thing. And what he does is, it's really weird. Jesus gets down on the ground and works up a ton of saliva. Spits into the dirt and begins to mix the dirt with the saliva. I was gonna act this out today. I thought that some of you might view it inappropriate or disgusting. When did you stop attending Ada Bible Church? Well, I'll tell you. There's this one weekend where the preacher was spitting all over the place. And we said, it's time to go. So in order to create mud, you got to work up quite a little bit of saliva to create some mud. So he spits in the dirt and he begins to mix it, almost like, you'd need water and grain or water and wheat into bread. And then he takes this mud that he's made and he goes over to the guy's eyes and he smears the mud on the guy's eyes. You're going, there's no way that's in the Bible. It really is. I'll show you. After saying this, he spit on the ground. He made some mud with the saliva and put it on the man's eyes. It's disgusting. Go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam. Siloam, what does that mean? Oh, this word means sent. Siloam means sent. So he sent the man to the pool of scent, So go to the pool of Siloam and wash in the pool of Siloam. Now, I'm just suspecting that if some of you are the blind guy there and someone tries to cake mud on your eyes, you're not having any getaway. And the guy lets him do the mud pies in the eyes thing, and then he marches off to the pool. He knew that this was Jesus. Now, he couldn't see, but he could hear. And undoubtedly, in the conversations that went past him on whatever street corner he occupied, he heard of people that were enthusiastic fans of Jesus, blabbing on about him doing this or that. And he had heard from people who hated Jesus' guts and wanted him gone. He knows that it's this teacher, Jesus, who does the mud on the eyes and speaks to him and says, now go to the pool of Siloam and wash. He does it, and on his way to the pool, I wonder if going through his mind is, never in our recorded history has it ever been mentioned that a person with blindness who was born with that condition was cured. This has never happened before. No one has ever heard of this happening before. But he went. Second half of verse 7. So the man went and washed and came home saying, does that seem anticlimactic to you? The man went, the man washed, and he came home seeing. He sees color, and he sees texture, and he sees building, and he sees people, and he sees faces, and he's able to walk to his old neighborhood, just kind of like, hey, how you doing? Check out what happens next. This is humorous. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg? Some claimed that it was. Others said, no, it only looks like him. But he himself insisted, I am the man. How then were your eyes open, they asked. He replied, 5-point outline. Are you ready? The man they called Jesus made some mud, put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see. That's it. Guy they called Jesus, he made mud. He put the mud in my eyes. He said, go wash in that pool. I went and washed in the pool, and now I can see. And then they said, where is this man? They asked. I don't know. I don't know. Where is this man? I don't know. Wait a minute, back up. He made mud? Yeah, he made mud with saliva and dirt. He made mud and put it on my eyes. So he made mud. You're gonna have to come with us. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now, the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. Therefore, the Pharisees also asked him how he had received the sight. The 5-point outline turns into a 3-point outline. He put mud on my eyes, the man replied, and I washed, and now I see. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. The man that healed you cannot possibly have the power and the sanction of God the Father because he is a Sabbath breaker. He is a sinful man because he does not keep the Sabbath as we would keep the Sabbath. He cannot be from God because he breaks the Sabbath. Step back with me into Jewish culture, particularly first century Jewish culture. On 6 days you shall work, on the 7th you shall stop working. This is from the 10 Commandments. Moses goes up on Mount Sinai, receives the 10 Commandments. You shall have no other gods. Don't make idols and bow down to them. Honor your mom and dad. Honor your marriage vows. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Don't kill each other. Don't steal each other's property. Don't lie about each other. And honor the Sabbath by keeping holy. Their Sabbath was Saturday, so you had work, stop. Now, what group of people, and for them it was Saturday, it was like sundown Friday to sundown Saturday. Question, what group of people did they take the blind guy, formerly blind guy, to? Did you see that? They took him to a group of Pharisees. Do you know what the word Pharisee means? Word Pharisee means set apart one. Originally, I believe the Pharisees grew up out of a group of people who longed to have their hearts totally set apart to service of God. Every part of our life will be set apart to honor our God. So where it got a little crazy was they longed so much to have hearts set apart to God. They didn't want to break any command. They didn't want to break a hint of breaking a command. And so they took that thing honor the Sabbath by keeping it holy, don't do any work. And they said, yeah, but what is work? Let's define what work is. And in a volume called the Mishnah, in the Mishnah, they broke down work into 39 separate categories. Just to give you a sampling, not the full 39 list, but plowing, planting, harvesting, threshing, winnowing, sifting, kneading, baking, shearing wool, washing wool, dyeing wool. You get the idea. We're not supposed to work. But what is work, and how can we break it down into all its various parts? And I go, which one did Jesus break? Plowing, planting, harvesting, threshing, winnowing, sifting, kneading. It was right there. You got down and you mixed saliva and you mixed dirt. You are a lawbreaker, and lawbreakers cannot be from God. Does this seem goofy to any of you? Okay, learning moment here. There might be a gut reaction to look at stories like that in history, go like, what a bunch of idiots. I can't believe they did that. I would plead with you not to do that. As you read the Bible, or hear the Bible taught, there are several occasions when you will encounter people behaving badly. And there's a tendency to kind of place ourselves above those characters and look down on those characters. My friends, I think it is much healthier, instead of placing yourself above them and looking down on them, I think it's healthier to embed yourself with them and to go, where do I do that? Where am I likely to do that? Where can I do that? Rather than a spirit of superiority to go, what a bunch of losers, what a bunch of self-righteous, arrogant idiots. Better to place yourself among them and to say, where do I do that? And the that here is this. It's when our view of God causes us to miss the heart of God. In this whole Sabbath thing, their view of God had caused them to miss the heart of God. And I just want to suggest that it takes an incredible amount of insight and not a little humility to be able to recognize in our lives where our view of God is causing us to miss the heart of God. I mean, it's the dude for the first time in his marriage who begins to understand, I need to take some spiritual leadership in my family. I need to take spiritual leadership in my home. I need to be the spiritual leader of my home. But in the process, he begins to treat his wife like a doormat. And his view of God causes him to miss the heart of God. Is when someone pursues theology and goes, I want to know the Bible. I want to have good theology, but out of deep, rich, long, exhausting theological study, they start to feel self-superior and condescending to people they view as wrong. You go, yeah, what happens when your view of God causes you to miss the heart of God? It can happen with something as simple as your view of forgiveness. Listen, I have known people who've said, I believe that God is a forgiving God, and what I'm about to do, I know it's wrong. And I'm going into it with my eyes wide open because I know God will forgive me later. I said, let me get this right. You know it's wrong and you're going to do it because you believe God's forgiving. Yeah, I'm going, you're using your view of forgiveness to justify rebellion, to justify blowing God off. Beware of your view of God causing you to miss the heart of God. And it's what happens here with the Pharisees. So this controversy that begins to spin here, rather than placing yourselves above them, I just think it's healthier, place yourself with them. Just kind of go, where can I do that? Where do I do that? And again, I think it takes an incredible amount of insight and humility to be able to recognize where that's happening. But yeah, Jeff, I just still can't believe they did that. Were all of the Pharisees that narrow-minded and closed-hearted? No. Some of them look at the guy who's healed and say, listen, that guy cannot be from God. He doesn't keep the Sabbath. There's an entirely different group that are going, whoa, wait a minute, time out. If God's power weren't with this guy, then how in the world could the healing have taken place? It's the second half of verse 16. But others asked, How can a sinner perform such signs? So they were what? They were divided. There was a divided opinion. Some are saying, he doesn't keep the Sabbath like we keep the Sabbath. God cannot be with him. And they're going, what are you talking about? God wouldn't answer his prayer if he was a sinful, wayward person. And so there's this back and forth. And the blind guy, he's just standing there watching this tennis match with these two opinions. And finally they reach an impasse and they turn to him and say, well, it was your eyes he opened. What do you have to say? Verse 17, then they turned again to the blind man. What have you to say about him? It was your eyes that he opened. The man replied, he's a prophet. He is a prophet. And they look at him and go, we're not even sure you were ever blind. We don't know you. Witness dismissed. And now they call in the parents. I got three questions for the parents. Question number one, is this your son? Question number two, was he born blind? Question number three, he can see now. How did that happen? And the parents go, we can answer 2 out of the 3. Verse 20, we know he's our son, the parents answered, and we know that he was born blind, but how he can see now or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him, he is of age, he will speak for himself. They're scared. Yes, 2 out of 3. We know he's our son. We know he was born blind, but what happened? We don't know. Ask him. You read the next couple of verses. It says that the Pharisees have already decided, and word has spread, that anybody who becomes a disciple of Jesus is going to be kicked out of the synagogue. The synagogue is the center of Jewish religious and cultural life. You would be disenfranchised. You would lose the community you're part of. They are scared of the repercussions if they say out loud that it was Jesus who healed this guy. Get the parents out of here, bring the blind guy back in. Verse 24, round 2. Second time, they summoned the man who had been blind. Give glory to God by telling the truth. They said, we know this man is a sinner. He replied, whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. I woke up this morning with a cane, sitting on a curb with my hand out, and now I can see you. Whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. I just know that I was blind and now I see. By the way, one of America's best loved hymns, Amazing Grace, has got that lyric. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. It's taken right out of that verse in John chapter 9. Okay. Roll back the tape, cover the details again. We need to hear it again. Then they asked him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? The guy says, haven't we been over this? He answered, I've told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? Then they hurled insults at him and said, you are this fellow's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, like up on Mount Sinai to receive the 10 Commandments. But as for this fellow, we don't know where he comes from. The man answered, now that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to a godly person who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. To this they replied, you were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? And they threw him out. It's been an interesting day. Why do bad things happen to good people? In that culture, bad things don't happen to bad people. Good people, as a theological belief. If something really nasty happened to you, you had it coming. Well, if a person was born with a condition, well, was it their parents? When they say you were, what do they say? You were steeped in sin. When? At birth. You were drowning in sin the moment that you were born, and that's why God struck you with blindness. How dare you, a sinful person, lecture us? And they throw him out on his ear. What's going on here? What's going on here is a variety of unbelief that goes, I don't care what the evidence is. I don't care what I see. I don't care how it's explained. I absolutely refuse to believe. Because, my friends, belief is consequential. If that group of Pharisees said, no, you're right, we have never heard of anybody born blind receive sight, and apparently God the Father answered his prayers to give you sight, and he has the power of God in his life. Therefore, we must repent of our view of religion and turn to him and follow him. Belief is consequential. If they acknowledge that this man had received sight at Jesus' hands with the blessing, sanction, and power of God, they now have to become followers. They have to go, I'm wrong, I'm wrong, I'm wrong, he's right. It has to tip over all their preconceived views of the way they had been going about their spiritual life, and they were unwilling to do that. Know that this is sometimes the case with disbelief. Know that often when a person says, yeah, I don't believe there's a God, I don't believe there's even a God out there. Forget about the Jesus question. I don't even think there's God out there. It is not always because a person has carefully investigated the evidence and drawn to that conclusion. Often it's simply no more than saying, nobody's telling me what to do with my life. Ain't nobody telling me what to do with my life. Every once in a while, I'll run into a quote from an atheist that goes, yeah, that's pretty much the way it went down. Yeah. Don't think we turned over all the evidence and then decided, yeah, God isn't out there. He says, listen, we don't want to get our instructions from anybody. That's why we've adopted the philosophy that we have. Let me show you a couple quotes here that kind of illustrate this. Did any of you, like back in school, have to read Brave New World? Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. This is the picture of Aldous Huxley, atheist, and he was writing about his atheism, and this is kind of thick, but I just want to show it to you. The philosopher who finds no meaning in the world, meaning no God, no meaning, is not concerned exclusively with a problem in pure metaphysics. I know it's dense, isn't it? But he's saying the philosopher who says, yeah, there's no God out there, there's no meaning out there. This person is not simply trying to answer a philosophical question. He says he is also concerned to prove that there is no valid reason why he personally should not do as he what? No one's telling me what to do. Huxley's quote goes on. He says, for myself, as no doubt for most of my friends, the philosophy of meaninglessness, meaning no God, no meaning, the philosophy of meaningless was essentially an instrument of liberation from a certain system of morality. We objected to morality because it interfered with our sexual freedom. We want to do whatever we want to do. No church, no God, no system is going to be boss over us. He said that's where atheism came from. It wasn't like, oh, we've explored all of the systems of thought, we've looked over all the evidence, and somehow came to the conclusion that there is no God. He says, no. We don't want there to be a God. No one's telling us what to do. That was Huxley. There's that other quote I want to look at. The guy's name is Thomas Nagel. And I found this in the book I've mentioned once or twice during this series called Encounters with Jesus by Tim Keller. Tim Keller is a pastor of a Presbyterian church in New York City on Manhattan, and just writes thoughtfully and deeply to a contemporary, cosmopolitan, metropolitan congregation about belief and why we believe and why we don't believe. And so he quotes Thomas Nagel, who Harvard PhD, and then he was chairman of the philosophy department at New York University. And so this is Thomas Nagel. He says, I want atheism to be true, and I'm made uneasy by the fact that some of the most intelligent and well-informed people I know are religious believers. It's like head of the philosophy department says, listen, I want atheism to be true. And it really kind of troubles me that some of the most thoughtful and smart people I know are like believers. And then he goes on to say, it's not just that I don't believe in God and naturally hope that I'm right in my belief. It's that I hope there is no God. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the universe to be like that. He says, understand something. I am not impartial and I am not objective. I don't want God to exist. I don't want nobody telling me what to do. The reason why this is so important for us to talk about is because we are not entirely objective on this question of God and on the question of Jesus. Belief in Jesus is consequential. If God is the creator, if he designed the universe, if he engineered it, if Jesus came as the Son of God to take our place, to die for us, and if God validated his claims by bringing him back to life, he deserves the steering wheel of my life. It means if I believe I'm no longer the boss of me, I need to learn Jesus' way. And it comes to a question, can I trust him? Will I trust him? If the Pharisees believe in Jesus, it's going to turn their entire world upside down. They're going to have to sit at his feet and soak in his way, and they're going to have to learn a brand new way of doing relationships, seeing people, and seeing God. Belief is consequential. And often we refuse to come to faith because we don't want anybody telling us what to do. Just understand that that might be part of the mix in some of our journey. So back to Tim Keller. I heard a talk he did recently, and Tim Keller said, often when someone comes to faith, there are like three components or three influences. And he says there's intellectual, relational, and there's personal. Intellectual is just, seriously, those of us who go, look, seriously, is the Bible reliable? Is it conceivable that Jesus was executed on a Roman cross and then came back to life? I don't mind a leap of faith. I just don't want some blind, illogical leap of faith. Please let me know that my faith is anchored in reasonability. And so it's common for people to ask certain intellectual questions. Is this a reasonable faith? He says, but secondly, there's a relational component. Often you get a person say, yeah, all Christians are hypocrites, but then a guy starts working for them that isn't. And he'll give you the shirt on his back, and he's strong, and he's honest, but he's kind, and he's gracious. After 3 years of watching this dude, one day when the dude says, hey, I'd love for you to go to a worship service with me. I'd love for you to go to an Easter service with me. Even if you never come back again, dude, just come on, just do it once. Often when someone comes to faith, there's a relational side. Remember that. There are people who draw us toward Christ. It's possible for you to draw others in the direction of Christ through consistent living, consistent loving living, and speaking with respect at the right moments, gentleness and respect. There's a relational side. Third one's different. Third one's personal. Now it gets personal. My intellectual questions have been answered. I have a relationship that has drawn me toward understanding who Christ is. Now comes a personal question. Will I submit my life to Christ? Will I give the steering wheel of my life to Christ? And there are some people that play this intellectual game endlessly and on purpose and get stuck there intentionally. I got 3 questions I need answered, and you get 3 answers. I got 3 more questions. And you get answers. I have 6 more questions. And then you loop around to the first 3 questions. And the answer is, I want to stay up here asking intellectual games because there's no way I want to bow my knee to a God who's going to inform my life, or a Jesus who's going to say, I have a way that is different than your way, and invite you. I want you to learn my way. But you will yield your will to the will of another. And for those of you that have been burned relationally, this is one of the scariest things you'll ever do. Say, I didn't trust my parents, and my ex-wife or husband burned me, and I had a business partner that was doing this. I've just learned, do not trust people. And when God says, trust me, it's you don't understand how hard it is to trust. That's part of the story that John is laying out with the life of Jesus. He's just saying, Jesus shows up at a wedding and there's this broke couple and Jesus makes wine at the wedding. Trust him. He's the master of the feast. Jesus sits down at a well beside a woman that's burned through 5 marriages. He doesn't disguise the truth, but he moves toward her gently in conversation. He knows her, but doesn't run her off. Trust him. There's Jesus giving sight to this blind man, and it's the same. It's just trust me, trust me, trust me. But this is a scary move, and it's personal, because it will mean submitting your will and subjecting your will to the will of the Christ. My take on this story in John chapter 9 is that the Pharisees refused to believe no matter what the evidence was, because it would be submitting their will and their minds and their preconceived ideas to what Jesus was about, and they weren't going to have any. It was just too disruptive to acknowledge that he is actually from God. They take the evidence and they throw it out. They take the blind man and they throw him out. Story over. Almost. Jesus, who has absolutely disappeared from the story, tracks the guy down and finds him. Jesus heard that that they had thrown him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the?" That's interesting. Do you believe in the what? Do you believe in the Son of Man? Now, the Son of Man was a synonym for Messiah. Do you believe in the Messiah? The appointed one that was going to someday enter the world, the one sent by God. "Who is he, sir?" the man asked. "Tell me so that I may believe in him." Jesus said, "You have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you." You're looking at him. You're looking at him right now. Then the man said, "Lord," what? 2 words. Say it again. What? 2 words. "I believe." Lord, I believe. And then it says, and he worshiped him. In that culture, to worship is to get down on your face. He gets down on his face at Jesus' feet. Says, "I believe," and he worshiped him. That's not the way they had to go down. This man could have looked at Jesus and said, "Let me get this right. Let me get this right. You represent God? You represent God? I got a few questions. You tell me why my parents had to go through that all those years. Do you have any idea what it's like to sit at that corner with your hand out day after day after day after day? Do you have any idea what it's like to move through life in darkness, not being able to see? The conversation didn't go down that way. He says, "I believe," and he worshiped. There was just something about this encounter with Jesus. I mean, we might ask, the disciples ask, why this, why now, why him, why that? In this moment, he just worships. I wonder how many times the parents just, why is this happening? Why is this happening to us? Why did this happen to our family? Why is this happening to him? God is distant, God is absent, God is silent. And Jesus says, no. This whole thing happened so that the works of God might be revealed in this very complex, chaotic situation. The works of God are on display. I think that's something to cling to when you encounter or enter into a season of life that is just tragic, complicated, or just confusing. 3 weeks ago, I had a speaking gig in Chicago, and met the kids for pizza in Wicker Park. Had time to hang out with my daughter and son-in-law, with Hazel. Because of the ultrasound and everything, we knew she was going to have Down syndrome before she was born, and we knew that there were going to be heart problems before she was born. And I mean, almost immediately, but very rapidly, I began to see how this could be good for the heart of our family. A couple days after being with them in Chicago, kids came up to see us. And learning about the challenges that Hazel was going to experience, and the kids were going to experience with Hazel, I began thinking about those two, the cousins. And I'm just thinking, if God desires to cultivate in Preston and Cooper hearts that are sensitive to the needs of the world, hearts that are soft to the needs of the world, having a cousin, growing up with a cousin that's special? Could that soften them? So that throughout life, when they encounter other people that aren't normal, whatever normal is, could God already be crafting a heart of sensitivity for the cousins? It took no imagination to be able to see how God could use her situation and this condition to soften us toward others. By that, I want to insinuate that I've got it figured out, and I don't want to. The last thing I'm doing is trying to say, and this resolves the problem of pain and the mystery of suffering. It doesn't. I just know it's possible to enter a situation that has a fair level of complexity and difficulty, and to be able to go, God, please be at work. Please put your works on display, not just in spite of this, but through this and around this and in this. Author Philip Yancey, over 30 years ago, he wrote the book, Where is God When It Hurts? In that book, he acknowledged that one of the first questions that we are prone to ask when the bomb drops is why? Why this? Why us? Why them? Why that? Why now? Why her? Why him? And he said that that's a normal question to ask out of the gate. But he said with healing and over time, a lot of times the question should change from why to what now? Can the question change from why to what now? And I think part of the what now is opening our hearts just to be able to say, God, I didn't want this. I didn't ask for this. I don't understand this, but I will trust you in this. Please display your work around and in and through this situation. And there's something around that smells like hope. And it certainly smells like trust. I don't want this space. I don't understand this space. I don't like this space. But God, give me the daily grace to trust you in this space so that your work would be on display in us. I'm going to ask you to stand, and I'm going to pray for you, and then in each of our rooms, a campus pastor or room host will come up and give parting instructions. So let me pray for you this day. Gracious God, I give thanks that we were in each other's company to look at this beautiful, controversial story. Lord, I pray for each man, each woman, each high school student, each college student that's here, each child. I pray that you would meet us in our hour of need and that we would learn to trust you. I pray that you would soften hard hearts. I pray that you would open blind eyes. In Jesus' name.